What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and spoiler alert, I am going to be discussing a whole bunch of stuff related to Black Widow, as well as some of the other titles that we have seen or that have been announced for Phase 4. But this is my theory of what is the second saga of the MCU. Let's get into it. Okay, so our Lord and Saviour, Kevin Feige, has told us that we're going to get an Earth-based storyline and a cosmic-based storyline, right? One on Earth, one in space. I argue that he's hiding a secret third one, and that secret third one is supernatural, demonic even, and it will sort of be a little tongue-in-cheek here, but Marvel showing Universal Studios what their dark universe could have looked like, but obviously using characters that they actually have rights to. But they actually have quite a lot of characters that fit the bill. We'll talk about those in a moment. We're going to focus, to begin with, on the Earth-based storyline, which I think is going to be Dark Reign. Now, the main characters that we've got here are Norman Osborn in the comics. Because of rights and Sony doing their own Spider-Man stuff, they're unlikely to want to give up exclusive access to Green Goblin, which means that they're unlikely to do the same for his civilian counterpart, even if that counterpart never becomes Green Goblin, which you don't introduce Norman Osborn and like, oh yeah, no, he's not the Green Goblin. That just doesn't happen. So he's unlikely to join the MCU, unfortunately. But in his place, we're going to put Thaddeus Ross for this theory to work. We already know he exists. We already know that he has a job within the government, and part of Dark Reign kind of involves being a part of the government. We have another character called the Hood, who I believe his name is Parker Robbins. Okay, not a character I believe many people have heard of, but he does have quite an interesting role here, and a role that we're going to look at a little later in the video as well. But he's featured heavily during the Dark Reign storyline in both the New Avengers and in the Punisher comics that were part of this whole crossover tie-in event. Within the New Avengers part of that storyline, Brian Michael Bendis, who was the writer and has been doing quite a lot of executive producing for MCU shows lately. Good to see him getting involved. I will confess I do like his work, but he explored the Hood's relationship with Dormammu, who is a character we've come to bargain with, as well as his quest to become the new Sorcerer Supreme. So obviously that relationship fits naturally for the MCU, with, you know, Dormammu getting in contact with another Earth-bound sorcerer, promising him great power, and the Hood just being like, okay, cool, if you can help me become Sorcerer Supreme, I'm not gonna do what Stephen Strange did to you. I won't, you know? So that could be an interesting relationship to have a look at throughout the Dark Reign storyline. And Rick Remender, writer of The Punisher, focused more on his activities as a gangster and a criminal, which could be within the MCU because he had a home and a family and, you know, maybe a job. And then he gets blipped, he gets snapped, he dusts away, comes back 5 years later, and if Falcon Winter Soldier has anything to go off, gets kicked to the side because you no longer fit our New World Order. You disappeared and were believed dead for 5 years. The world moved on without you, and you no longer fit in the world. Just sort of go over there and sit with the rest of the dregs of society while we figure out where to put you. Which for someone who, before that, probably went to Karmatage and learned how to be a sorcerer, he's gonna kind of be like, well, no, screw you, do some witchy-woo stuff and become a magically powered superhero, super villain, super criminal. During the Dark Reign event, he also features in his own mini-series, as well as he had a major role in Marvel Zombies 4, which is not issue number 4, but actually the 4th time Marvel Zombies was used as a storyline title. And then the last character I'm going to quickly discuss is Victoria Hand. In the MCU, she's been merged with Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine to give us Val. Proof in the pudding for that one is the purple streak in her hair. That is a Victoria Hand thing from the comics. It's also been done that way so that we don't get another Victoria Hand and confuse everybody about, well, isn't Victoria Hand that chick from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Because we know that Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige, they don't really fuck with anything that Marvel Television did. Because that was back when Marvel Studios had to answer to Marvel Comics instead of being able to just answer directly to Disney. Thank you, Bob Iger, for doing that, and giving Feige all the power. Really appreciate that. So those are the characters we're very interested in. Everyone else should be common knowledge. So we're not going to have Norman Osborn. We're going to get, in that case, we're going to get Ross, and yeah, everyone else sort of just fits in where they fit in this plot summary. So following the Skrull invasion of Earth during Secret Invasion for MCU, Thaddeus Ross leverages his success in defeating the Skrulls to replace Nick Fury as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Deadpool, who we know is coming, his third movie will be an MCU film. It currently does not have a release date assigned to it, but Deadpool plays a large role in that whole situation, as he's supposed to send the information on how to, or rather probably in this case, the fact that people are trying to kill the Skrull Queen Baranki, and he's supposed to send that information to Nick Fury himself. An error occurs, that error probably being nothing, aside from the fact of it gets there too late, potentially, but also an error occurs during the process, and the information also goes to Ross. Ross will turn up, shoot Baranki in the head. She will shapeshift back into Baranki from whoever she's been masquerading as. I believe in the comics it was Spider-Woman, which is really exciting if we can get Spider-Woman in here. Yes, it is. So we might end up getting someone cast for Spider-Woman, for Jessica Drew, which could be really cool. That's a character that has actually no relation apart from name to Spider-Man, so Marvel can do whatever they want with her without having to ask Sony's permission, which is really cool. She would probably, actually, you know what? She'd probably end up being on our Midnight Suns. I'll get to why in a second. So yeah, so she shoots Baranki. Ross will shoot Baranki in the head and become the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., which will probably also include sword as well, and he'll replace that with hammer. He might not replace that with hammer just because hammer actually has no meaning. It's an acronym and it's written out as an acronym, but it doesn't actually have a meaning even in the comics. So it might just simply be that he takes them over, and instead of having them be sort of out there away from the US government, he'll just bring them in and make them more accessible to the rest of the government, to be able to make the American government more capable of taking on superhuman threats, and Avengers level threats at that as well. Simultaneously, Ross will form an alliance with a group known as the Cabal, which in the comics included Dr. Doom, who's probably going to be our Thanos for the Second Saga, Emma Frost, who is an X-Man and a member of the Hellfire Club, and could be really cool to see her come in this sort of morally ambiguous sort of anti-hero kind of a sense. Loki, whose final episode comes out tomorrow as of recording, and the Hood, of course. Ross will use hammer or sword or shield or whatever he decides to call it in the MCU to carry out his agenda, and sometimes the Cabal's as well. However, Ross's actions and his reputation will influence a number of heroes and villains to attempt to resist his rule and to remove him from power by force if necessary. So that will probably happen. I believe there is at one point Victoria Hand gets sent off in the comics by Osborn to take on Bruce Banner and his son Scar, where she'll show us that she's got crazy good battle skills. It could be really interesting if that's a World Breaker Hulk event, and Ross is just finally like, nah, we need to get him under control. Get out there and lock that shit down now. Especially after She-Hulk comes out. It's like, oh wow, he's giving his blood to people now. He's making a Hulk army. That could then send Ross after the leader who has Banner's blood, or samples of Banner's blood, and lead to a Red Hulk as well, which would be really cool. So that's our Earth-based story. Our cosmic story will be Annihilation Wave. Now, the Wikipedia for this goes on. It gives great detail. It shows us in what actual comic books these events happen. Because rather than being a crossover event, it was sort of just like a continuous story that was originally told in, this character's book, then it moved to this book, then it moved to this book, as each character sort of had their major role sort of shown within the storyline. Now, characters like Ronan and Thanos are here. Because of that fact, I don't actually have any idea who's going to fill those roles. So for the moment, we're just leaving this up to the MCU god, which is, as I mentioned before, the Firestar. But in the prologue in the Annihilation prologue, the Annihilation Wave, which is a large armada of warships under the control of Annihilus, who, let's click on that and turn our brightness down so you can see his gorgeous face. And there he is. Isn't he pretty? Yep. He is a space bug. He enters this universe through essentially a tear in the fabric of reality known as the Crunch, which is actually just, as I said, it's a tear in reality that opens a doorway between this universe and the Negative Zone, which should sound familiar to comic fans as being the place where the Fantastic Four got their powers. and could actually be how he enters in the MCU. If fan theories are to be believed, the Fantastic Four film that is coming in Phase 4 could be set in the 60s. He may be fighting, they may be fighting Mole Man in the 60s, and then sort of get sucked into the negative zone because of one of Reed's experiments. And if it's a case of they just sort of get spat in and spat back out in their own sort of timeline thing, it could just be a case of the negative zone is essentially just a time vortex within the quantum realm, if they want to simplify it. But either way, they get spat through that, come out 60 years later. Potentially their powers have increased since then. So maybe, for instance, Johnny couldn't go supernova before and he can now. Maybe the Thing can no longer turn his powers off, or you know, gets the stony skin because of that, where before he was just like extremely strong. If it is the 60s and knowing that they're scientists, it could also be possible that they were trying to replicate the super soldier serum, especially with the 60s being, you know, Cold War type era. It could definitely be like, okay, we need a Captain America to protect us again, and maybe they just thought Ben Grimm could be that person. Who knows? There's a bunch of different ways they could go about it. But either way, if they get spat out, they could also end up that in their way through, they sort of knock Annihilus down a different one, and he comes out at a different point in time, at a completely different point in space, and that he just calls that the crunch. Once he's out, and once his force is with him, he wipes out the Kiln and all of its neighbouring planetary star systems, which obviously includes Xandar. Now, Xandar obviously was attacked by Thanos off-screen before Infinity War, and technically speaking before the post-credit scene of Thor Ragnarok. So half of its people were left, because Thanos went. Thanos' whole thing was half of everything. So he went there and did that. And so there would have still been some Nova Corps people left. They've probably been trying to rebuild, you know, the Xandar, whatever includes the Xandarian star system. Maybe they might also have, you know, a particular quote-unquote empire that they rule over and protect as its police force. But one way or another, they all get called to Xandar to defend it against this annihilation wave, which goes about as well as you'd imagine, and it results in a sole surviving member of the Nova Corps, known as Richard Rider, gaining the Xandarian World Mind and the Nova Force, which, among other things, where are we? Where is that? Here. So yeah, he allows the World Mind and the Nova Force to download themselves in their entirety into his mind and body in order to prevent themselves from being lost to the universe. To compensate for this massive upgrade in power, the World Mind creates a new uniform designed to help regulate the immense power of the Nova Force, as well as to also augment his mental and emotional capabilities with World Mind's own, in order to prevent him from going insane. Which means that his suit essentially can't come off. Which, if it's done well enough, so that it's not a Green Lantern scenario could mean potentially that his costume, at least in part, is animated. But yeah, so that happens. Whatever happens at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 will transpire that Drax and a character called Cammy in the comics, could just be a nickname for Chimeria, Drax's daughter in the MCU. They get arrested. They're on their way to Xandar as well, so they can be processed and sent off to the kiln. Xandar's attacked. Richard Rider ends up saving the prison transport because they're criminals, but that doesn't mean they deserve to die. Now, elsewhere in the galaxy, Ronan the Accuser, who is dead in the MCU, is arrested for treason. Super Skrull learns that the Annihilation Wave, after wiping out Xandar, is going to take out the Skrull Empire, and he leaves to defend that because he has the powers of the Fantastic Four, and Silver Surfer also decides to go and investigate. After leaving Xandar, Nova, and whatever Drax and Cammy, Chimeria, that might just include all of the Guardians of the Galaxy, they end up finding, like, they go over to the next star system, they find Quasar, the wielder of the quantum bands, assisting in the exodus of one of that star system's planets, getting them all off, the same way Thor and Loki and Valkyrie helped all the Asgardians get off Asgard before it was destroyed by Surtur. So we might even see Loki do that. I don't think it was in any of the episodes, but we definitely saw in the trailer him see the "Your Savior is here" part. So he might actually try to do that in this as well, which means that he could be one of the connecting characters between our cosmic line and our Earth line, just giving us a hint that these things will eventually clash, and Loki's got his finger in all the pies. So yes, the Annihilation Wave will arrive. The Guardians, Quasar, and Nova will all try to defend it. Quasar will end up getting consumed by Annihilus, who will then also take on the quantum bands and sort of level up in power. The rest of it eventually sort of then transpires that Annihilus is essentially trying to collect people that have the power cosmic, which is the power that they get from being a Herald of Galactus, because he wants to absorb that energy to just make him, his ability to wipe out planets with a single Death Star beam that much easier. He's already got his fashionable hand attire on. He just now needs his shiny little dots on it as well, which for him is the power cosmic instead of Infinity Stones. The way that they could do this could be really interesting as well if the power cosmic is simply just a force of, the atoms of the Infinity Stones. The physical embodiments of those constructs no longer exist, but the energy is still there, and that could now just be the power cosmic, which essentially means that he would be going after the Infinity Stones in order to wipe out all life. Because maybe he comes in, heard that Thanos was trying to do that in 2023, failed, and was like, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it. It started system by system, the same way Thanos did, and that'll ultimately be why he fails. It's because he's trying to do an old plan just better than the last guy that did it. We'll end up seeing whatever becomes of the Skrull Empire within the MCU essentially get destroyed. We will there's a group within this storyline called the Graces, which is essentially just a female Guardians of the Galaxy. It includes a character called Tana Nile, but it also is led by Gamora. Nebula's in there, a character called Stellaris, and I can't remember what title it's in, but I do know we're going to be getting Thane and Supergiant? I can't remember. I think it might have been Supergiant. But 2 more children of Thanos. Anyway, I do believe one of those characters is a female. I think Supergiant's a female, so she could be on it as well. This team could then also include Mantis. It may end up including Phyla-Vell and Moondragon, if Moondragon isn't with the Guardians, which in all honesty it probably won't be, because Phyla-Vell ends up becoming Quasar at the end of all of this and getting the quantum bands. But by that same token, that's at the end of all this, so she might. Yeah. They all try to fight off the oncoming Annihilation Wave as it targets, you know, the Kree Empire and the Shi'ar Empire, which could be really cool because they have ties to the X-Men, who would also be on our Earth storyline. And you know, so there's ties with relationships that people have in both of these scenarios that could be really interesting to explore in the films or in Disney Plus shows, etc. For instance, if the X-Men do go to the Shi'ar Empire and we get to see the relationship between Lilandra and Professor X, we might also get to see Cyclops reunite with his father, Corsair, who might be the captain of a ship called the Starjammers and running his own, you know, leg of the Ravagers. That'd be a really cool way to bring the Starjammers into it. And I know that we've technically already seen Raza in the MCU, but I don't recall anyone actually calling him Raza in that. So we could actually get just an alien called Raza Longknife. And Ch'od, Kree, Hepzibah, the whole gang. Could be really cool to see as well. But eventually it transpires that Annihilus captures Galactus and plans on using Galactus himself to enact his final annihilation wave. And it ends with Galactus proceeds to unleash a massive omnidirectional blast that later becomes known as the Galactus event. Silver Surfer is set ahead of the event by Galactus to herald the imminent destruction, as the unleashed Galactus obliteration perimeter wipes out the majority of the annihilation wave, more than 3 star systems, and even vaporizes a Watcher. A Watcher who, hopefully by this point, will have narrated 2, if not 3, maybe even 4, depending on how far in the future this particular event is seen on screen. Seasons of What If may end up being that same Watcher. Otherwise, it's any of those big-headed guys that Stan Lee was talking to in Volume 2. Nova, Star-Lord, and Phyla-Vell will have transported close to the flagship and be preparing to make the last jump when Galactus's energy wave arrives. Well, I did not scroll back far enough for this, did I? Let's just go the whole thing as quickly as I can. So 205 days after Annihilation Day, Nova's formed an army called the United Front to oppose the Annihilation Wave. His land-based army includes Drax, Gamora, Ronan, and Star-Lord, while his outer space front consists of Firelord, Redshift, and Dust. All three of those are Heralds of Galactus. They capture one of Annihilus's queens, who reveal that Thanos, and two other sort of very vague characters called Tenebris and Aegis had attacked and incapacitated Galactus and the Silver Surfer. Believing the power cosmic to be within his grasp, Annihilus orders his troops to kill the remaining former Heralds of Galactus. With their deaths, he absorbs their power cosmic. Thanos will then kidnap Moondragon and tell Drax via Fire the Bell that she'll be killed if Drax tries to chase him. So once again, Drax will be like, my fucking daughter, just give her back to me and let us be a family and leave us alone. But obviously, Thanos not here anymore. He dusted out, never to be dusted back. A character called Ravenous will lead an attack on the United Front, and he'll have many of Nova's former allies in his thrall, including one of the Heralds of Galactus known as Terrax the Tamer. During the conflict, a huge energy spike restores the supposedly deceased Super Skrull Kalert to his full power. Ravenous's troops will retreat as Annihilus's ship arrives. With Thanos' aid, Annihilus has turned an imprisoned Galactus into a weapon. The United Front is broken and defeated. In the aftermath of the battle, Nova sends out a warning to the heroes of Earth about the approaching wave. Drax stays behind to hunt and kill Thanos and retake his daughter again. Thanos had allied himself with Annihilus out of curiosity. When he learned of his plan is to extinguish all life in the universe, he planned to betray him by releasing Galactus. Just before doing so, Drax appears and kills him. Drax and Moondragon then release Silver Surfer, who in turn releases Galactus. So Thanos' job is done, but everyone's now out of Annihilus's prison. At the same time, Ronan the Accuser and a small band of allies, including Super Skrull, who is otherwise Ronan's sworn enemy, will arrive on the homeworld of ruling Kree House Fiero. Ronan will learn that House Fiero had allied themselves with Annihilus, and so he will then kill Fiero and be called by that planet's populace to be their new emperor. So again, I don't know who's going to fill his role. Then we'll get to see that whole bit where the Watcher gets vaporized, that whole bit where Nova, Quillen, Phyla Vel will arrive at the flagship right before it the energy wave arrives. Annihilus, having found that he was betrayed by Thanos and undone by Galactus, will use the quantum bands to protect himself from the energy blast. Nova will then do battle with him, but be unable to win until Phyla manages to steal the quantum bands from Annihilus, and then weakened Nova will kill him. A treaty will then a treaty between what is left of the Annihilation Wave and the Kree will then be signed, ceding certain Kree territories to Ravenous, and that will essentially end the overt hostilities with both sides now in an unhappy alliance, an unhappy treaty. But more or less, that is our cosmic story. Like I said, it's not really an easy one to explain, but we got there. And there are obviously things like who's going to fulfill the role for Ronan, who's going to fulfill the role for Thanos. And I honestly think Thanos one's probably going to end up being Thane. He might sort of be, you know, the last loyal son of Thanos. Yeah, As for Ronan, is Yonrog dead? I don't know if Yonrog's actually dead. I don't think he is. So it could be Yonrog from Captain Marvel. And it could be that, you know, he wants to sort of, I mean, obviously he wants to prove himself to the Kree as actually being capable of protecting them, unlike he did against Captain Marvel. You know, and it might have been his mission even before Ronan was taken down, but now he's just sort of taken that mantle upon himself as well, as being sort of this accuser. Maybe letting Veers get out of his hands is seen as being treasonous, and that could fit. Yeah, I actually like those ideas. So we're gonna say Thane and Yonrog. That's my theory for who's going to fill those respective roles. So our last but not least storyline is going to be our Midnight Suns, which I believe is going to be, like, the major one is going to be sort of a Rise of the Midnight Suns, Siege of Darkness storyline. The Rise of the Midnight Suns basically sort of sets up the whole idea anyway, with them sort of battling the Lilin, the children of Lilith, mother of all demons, and the first part of Siege of Darkness is them fighting the Lilin. So they're sort of the same. It does mean that if we get, you know, the first Midnight Suns could be called Midnights, could just be called the Midnight Suns and be that first part of Siege of Darkness, and a second Midnight Suns could be called Siege of Darkness, where they fight the Fallen, and sort of expand on the whole mythos with Zarathos, and have those two things sort of play out. I think we'll probably end up getting Fear itself will probably end up being part of this, because again, you're still dealing with sort of gods and that sort of thing, and the Thor movies have always sort of dealt with more of a fantasy element within the MCU, what with him fighting giants and elves and demons, so having to fight other gods in his own pantheon, with demon hunters and sort of a more traditional look at you know, evil in the Christian sense, and demons in that regard. Thor weirdly fits in with that sort of like supernatural fantasy element of things, rather than a sci-fi space side of things, or a more grounded Earth-related sort of things. So he's weirdly positioned for Fear itself to be one of our supernatural storylines. I think we're then gonna sort of see a bit of a crossover, because obviously there's going to be a natural progression of storylines, and I feel like the Thanos imperative is going to be part of our cosmic side of things, before the whole Annihilation Wave part comes through, and that actually deals with the Fault, where the Cancerverse is sort of left open, Cancerverse being the universe where the Marvel zombies sort of live. That is the universe where the zombies sort of originally start in the comics, so that could be where we get our Marvel Zombies storyline, and then I feel like their big sort of ultimate thing will be the Damnation storyline, where essentially Mephisto comes to Earth, lays claim to the city of sin known as Las Vegas, and for a time hell exists on Earth until the Midnight Suns sort of take him down. There's not really a whole heap more than that to unpack for them. I really think that that's going to be his progression. I want the Midnight Suns to happen so much that I've actually sort of put what I think the progress is going to be. So originally it's going to be they come together for a Siege of Darkness, and we think we're done with like Lilith and demons and the whole like hell aspect, and we can sort of move on to like, you know, Fear itself, which has the serpent, which is actually Carl Borson, who is Odin's brother, and feels that he's actually been cheated out of the throne himself, kind of Odin's Loki, if you want to look at it like that. And so he tries to claim the throne of Asgard, which even within the Fear itself comics does exist on Earth, although in that comic it's within the USA, and in the MCU it's in Tonsberg, Norway. So it could be a case of he tries to come there to try and keep it in this whole supernatural element. I think this is going to be the same movie that will potentially introduce us to Angela, Odin's daughter, because she was a character bought by Marvel from, I believe it was Image Comics, the people that made the Spawn comics. She was a Spawn villain, and Marvel sort of retcons her as, you know, a daughter of Odin who, in order to keep the peace after he was sort of beaten by the 10th realm of heaven, spelt the way you'd imagine, just without an A, so Heven, and in order to sort of keep the peace, he gave them his firstborn, Angela, and sort of sealed that realm away from the other 9 realms, as sort of like here's a proof of our treaty, of our truce, and so that you know that we can never invade again and go against this word to try and get my daughter back, I'm going to seal this up, and you guys can just sort of be over there doing your own thing, and I will never even know about it. So there's going to be no way that I'm going to know to interfere if I have, you know, if I think I should, sort of a deal. And I think with Odin now dead and Hela having come back, part of her origin in the MCU was Angela's origin as well. But I think that could be cool to see her come in. She is notably part of the Asgardians of the Galaxies in the comics, which we do know that we're sort of leading towards. That and it being another female character, essentially a cross between Thor and Gamora. Angela's a bit of a badass, so it'd be really cool to see her, and then, you know, we can sort of get angels in that regard there because she comes from heaven, and then yeah, she'd ultimately have to come back to help sort of defeat the devil, because angels versus demons is always a good supernatural horror theme. Could be really interesting. And all of this from our Dark Reign, our Annihilation Wave, and our ultimately Damnation storyline. I think it's going to end up bringing us to a head where we've got, you know, we've got the Thunderbolts, we've got the Avengers in whatever capacity they hold. We'll end up with the Fantastic Four, we'll end up with the X-Men in whatever capacity they take, we'll have the Young Avengers, we'll have a whole bunch of other little teams that have broken off and are doing this particular thing. You know, we'll have the Midnight Suns, we'll have the Guardians of the Galaxy. It'll all come to a head when each of their little corners of the universe, potentially even corners of the multiverse, because we do know that the multiverse is going to be a big thing, at least in phase 4, if not continuing from there, because I don't know how you step back once the multiverse has been revealed to exist. So yeah, once that's sort of been revealed, it's sort of there, and this will all come to a head with a Secret Wars culmination, where, you know, each team ends up being pitted against the other, and this will also include things like the Cabal, which was part of the Dark Reign storyline. We might end up with, you know, like a Masters of Evil sort of deal there. There'll be a couple of groups of villains as well, but I think the best way that they could do Secret Wars is to actually take inspiration from both of them. So have it sort of set up that the Beyonder initially, and obviously if we're looking at Secret Wars, we're looking at this as being our Infinity War / Endgame thing, so another two-parter. The first part could be the original 1985 Secret Wars with the Beyonder. At the end of that, we could see Doctor Doom step up and claim his title, leaving the heroes and the villains sort of scattered across Battle World, with no real sort of way to sort of regroup together because they've just been completely shattered. Any alliances that were held between teams are gone, to give us our end game of this second saga, what I'm going to be referring to from now on as the Secret Saga, because Secret Wars, Secret Saga, Infinity War, Infinity Saga, makes a little bit of sense. So yeah, it will culminate with the God Emperor Doom version of Secret Wars from, I believe, 2007, 2000 and something. So that could be a really interesting way to progress, and ultimately, you know, with all of the Earth-based heroes having fought their own things there and dealing with that, I think Avengers vs. X-Men is likely going to be part of that. That's going to be our Civil War event to split up our Earth-based teams. I think we'll get something sort of like an Empire event on the cosmic side of things. So there'll be this like uneasy alliance between the Shi'ar and the Skrull and the Kree. Maybe whatever remains of the Nova Corps. Potentially that might look like an Annihilators team that Richard Rider pulls together, whatever the Guardians of the Galaxy or as Guardians of the Galaxy look like, so that you've got a couple of factions just in that side as well. And the Annihilation Wave will come and they'll all be shattered because, you know, you weren't here to help me fend off this part of the Annihilation Wave, and that ultimately resulted in us losing these planets that were part of our section of the galaxy within that shared coalition of the Shi'ar, Skrull and Kree. So that alliance will disappear come the Annihilation Wave. And then, yeah, with the whole Siege of Darkness bit, having to begin with demons and then the actual Spirit of Vengeance himself, Zarathos, you know, to sort of start off, that whole group's going to just have an uneasy relationship to begin with. Not to mention that within the Marvel Zombies portion itself, the Midnight Suns is actually sanctioned by ARMOR, which is a government agency that monitors and polices alternate realities. So they'll be dealing with the multiverse to begin with. Their major villain will probably end up being Shumagorath, and that's where all of our multiverse stuff will sort of take place in our supernatural side of things, which makes sense that it would first appear in Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, because he's a wizard. He's using magic, which is traditionally seen as the devil's work, as sort of referenced by Agatha Harkness in the Darkhold. and that sort of plot within WandaVision hints very strongly at Mephisto existing as well. So him then revealing himself at the end of it all, with having slowly built up his power to be able to come to Earth. You know, it could be that during part of all of whatever happens with the Midnight Suns, he actually frees Agatha Harkness from her imprisonment in Westview. But yeah, so that team is then sort of chosen to contain the zombie virus outbreak from further spreading into the universe from the Fault, which would obviously first appear in the Thanos Imperative, again tying our cosmic and our supernatural parts together, the same way that some of our Earth things would relate to our supernatural stuff, what with Doctor Strange sort of being an Avenger. I could see the Illuminati forming because of this, as a way for the heroes to sort of maintain at least a group that sort of looks at the Earth-based threats, the cosmic-based threats, the multiversal supernatural threats, and sort of decides which one's the biggest one. And obviously within that, characters that think the cosmic stuff's more important. Like, we've got this wave coming through that's going to wipe out our planet. Doesn't matter what happens with stuff on Earth if this happens, and it really doesn't matter what happens with the supernatural stuff if that's going to happen, because that's going to happen. While Doctor Strange might be like, no, you don't understand. Shumagorath is far and beyond what Annihilus and Galactus are posing as far as threats are concerned. Like, this guy consumes realities, not just, you know, planets, not just the star system. He consumes whole realities, including all of its little pocket dimensions. The Annihilation Wave is only going to take out this layer of reality, whereas Shumagorath will consume the whole cake. And meanwhile, there'll be other characters that are just arguing that, no, look, if we need to get the Earth unified so that we can, you know, afford to take on these other threats, and there'll be alliances to different things within each different character, and they'll probably end up being their own little team on Battleworld as well, which could be really interesting to see. But yeah, that's all I've got for this video, which is funny to say since it's like, what, nearly an hour long. It's definitely a longer one. If you enjoyed it, however, because I've literally, this is like boiled down as much as I could make it. I am planning on doing a podcast with a friend, and we're just going to explore all these ideas in a lot more depth, because we're going to look at them sort of film by film, like what do we think is going to happen here, how's it going to play into this theory, etc. So I will link that in the description once the first episode is out. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big old thumbs up, and while you're there smashing buttons, smash that one there, subscribe button. You might as well hit the one next to it too, which is the notification bell, so you can be notified when I upload new videos. Promise they're all not this long, I promise. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you think. And yeah, until next time, keep your head screwed on.